become co-host as well.
Okay.
Mbak, kalau recordingnya dari aku aja yang recording.
Yes.
Oh ya, the same ya, nanti masuk ke host.
Yes, betul.
Tapi nanti pas jam 10 sih maksudnya recordingnya.
It's okay, no problem.
Oh iya, oke, got it. Thank you.
Salsabila. Okay.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's okay. I've forgotten how I used to know how to put my picture into the PowerPoint, but I'm trying to remember how to do it. I've already forgotten. It's in one way, you really need to have the PowerPoint as sort of 3/4 of the screen and the presenter as 1/4 of the screen, but I don't know how to do that.
Okay. From the Zoom, I will make a spotlight, Pak Paul. I will add pin. A second. Something like this. So only the speaker and the PPT. This is what I can do in Zoom.
Okay. Anyway, that should be good. You can see, can you see the whole slide, or is part of it concealed?
That's perfect. Yeah, the whole screen. And that's beautiful and perfect. Let me take a picture. Okay. Yeah.
So we've already got a lot of participants there. Is that right?
Mr. Paul, we are still waiting for others, so I'm so sorry.
No, but we don't start until 1 o'clock, didn't you say?
No.
No?
Just couple minutes, I think.
Oh.
Right.
So how many students, I mean, the link has been shared to, in my Eventbrite, actually, it is more than 50 participants. And I think does the head of the head of your program share to the students?
Already, to new students. We have new students. We have new students, right? Angkatan baru kan? So we have
new batch, yeah.
Yes, new batch. We have shared that. But the problem is that if we have no class, this is holiday, right? In Indonesian campus, so I'm afraid that some of them are still sleeping. I'm afraid.
Holiday? Oh, I mean.
Yes, this is holiday, right? For the campus.
Right.
Masih libur. Yes, in UNAS masih libur. But I've already remind my students to as soon as possible to join to this webinar.
Good. So it's now there. Is it 9:39 there? Is that what time it is there?
Yes,
9:40.
Yeah.
9:40.
Yes.
Now 9:40 to be accurate. Yeah. Oh, okay, good. And then, so you were planning to start at 10, is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. 9:40.
Is it okay, Mr. Paul?
Yeah, that's good. No. I just was surprised to see so many people already in the meeting. Jadi mereka sudah bisa mendengarkan percakapan kita kan?
Yes.
That's remarkable. I think they are so excited they joining earlier
Yep.
than it's supposed to be.
Karena saya rasa sudah harus mulai menghibur mereka
Oh yeah.
kalau mereka sudah masuk ya,
Oh,
daripada menunggu begitu.
Oh, I see.
Terima kasih Pak Paul. Even Pak Paul can speak bahasa Indonesia really well. Oh my God.
Because the head of the department already warned them, you must join earlier because we have a very special speaker this morning, Mr. Paul.
Oh, tetapi mudah-mudahan tidak terpaksa ya.
Oh, enggak. Terpaksa pun juga nggak apa-apa, Mr. Paul.
Oh, mereka seharusnya bebas ya. Kalau siap untuk menikmati ini, ya saya lebih senang ya. Kalau nilainya mulai dikurangi kalau tidak masuk, rasanya tidak enak kan?
Mbak Yoyo is joking. Yeah, sometimes I think 50% forced, 50% voluntarily. But this is really great opportunity, exactly, Pak Paul, for new students, for young generations. This is really amazing opportunity.
So what level of English do you think most of them have? Have many of them studied English at university already?
Mbak Yayu?
Yep, some of them are new, some of them already at fourth semester, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth semester. Ana, Ibu Kajur masih ada workshop, jadi bisa fleksibel aja ya, maksudnya nanti kita bisa mulai, nanti bisa diakhirkan juga bisa. Is it okay?
Ya, ya Mbak, aku ikut panduanmu deh.
Masih ada pengabdian masyarakat lagi mengisi acara. Tadi udah telepon. Okay. Anyway, so ini Mr. Paul mau share screen sendiri atau I can help?
If it's already working, if you can see my slides.
Yes.
Yep. And if I change it, you can see that. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. So it's easy for me to keep the rhythm of the presentation if I'm controlling it here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm very bad at going next slide.
Okay, thank you very much.
Perfect. Oh.
So Anna, when was the last time you had a workshop?
Yeah, Paul was really amazing as well with the students in Padang, and the moderator is Evelyn. She is Monash alumni as well.
Ah, okay.
And then, talking about Australian sport, especially FL, because the speaker is Ian, the founder of Krakatoa. See in your picture here.
Yeah.
Yes, there. And actually, I know Krakatoa from this picture in your slide, Paul, Sofia. This is actually Sofia. She is living in Jakarta too, I think. Yeah, she is living in Jakarta, Sofia, as well. I just share with my experience, and Putih experience is amazing.
Well, I might need your help later on because I've got to try and recruit at least one or two Indonesians to play Trugo this season. Yeah. So it's a sport I'll explain in my presentation, but I've got to get one or two Indonesians. So if you know anyone living in Melbourne who might want to join, you can let me know. It's not very big commitment. It's only about 1.5 hours in the week.
That will be great, Pak Paul. I think, yeah, there is a WhatsApp group of Indonesian students who still studying at Monash, mixed with the alumni, so I can share the information. So is it in Trugo? Is it in Melbourne City or in Footscray or where, Pak Paul? Usually.
Well, my club, that's the one down at the bottom there on the screen. It's in Footscray. And we play around the inner suburbs of Melbourne.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Despite the students mostly live in Clayton and Caulfield, so is it in the weekend as well, Paul? Sometimes
we do have we have it on the weekend, so people don't have to play every week. And sometimes we have games on Thursday, but we also have games on Saturday.
Saturday, that's cool. Let me share to Indonesian student as well. And I really excited to know Trugo as well, especially from today. This look exciting.
So it's probably there would be Indonesian students at Melbourne University or Victoria University who would be closer to where we are.
I see. Yeah, but anyway, it can be fun for the Indonesian students to experience new culture, new sport. I mean, fun, really fun, look fun. And how's your Indonesia experience, Pak Paul? I really love to hear. When do you first time visit Indonesia? I think it's a long time ago and many times.
Very long time ago. Very long time ago. Saya dulu peserta pertukaran pemuda Australia dan Indonesia. Itu pertama kali saya ke Indonesia.
Wow. So Australia Indonesia Youth Exchange Program, AYEP.
Yep, AYEP.
Wow, that's amazing.
Tahun ini ulang tahunnya ke 40. Jadi saya diundang ke Canberra untuk merayakan AYEP.
So did you also first batch, Pak Paul?
Did I what?
First batch of AYEP?
No, I was the second batch. I think we were the second batch. So very early. So I'm going to represent our year in Canberra. So in fact, even our decade, because they're bringing representatives from each decade.
Yeah.
And we're meeting at the Governor General's place. So I don't know how many Indonesians will be brought over, but hopefully there'll be some Indonesians.
I see.
Unfortunately, we can't advertise it now because the program's just closed. So the new batch will be starting soon.
Yeah, after the COVID and so many, That's
yes,
exciting.
It's all been online. It's all been online.
I see.
Dalam jaringan.
And okay, wow. So I met L. William in actually like in May, Pak Paul. There were Australia Indonesia Institute. We came to Semarang. There were Greg Philly, L. William.
Oh yes,
Ellie, Ellie is the AYEP alumni, I think.
Yep.
Ellie Williams.
There's a lot of us around. It's amazing to see how many people continued with Indonesian studies after they were on the program, because I had nothing to do with Indonesia or Indonesian until I went on that program. I had never studied Indonesian.
But your connection is still amazing, Papa. I also saw YouTube. There is talking about history of Indonesia. We came to Australia, and there is a reference who said from Thomas Powell, who talk about the first people who came to Australia, Makassar people. It is from your book, your reference from the reference from Paul Thomas.
Yes. Well, so I'm hoping we will get to translate it into Indonesian. I went just before COVID. I was negotiating with people in Indonesia to try and get it translated and published in Indonesia. But when COVID hit, we lost contact, and it was it was still, because we're just starting the negotiations. So I'm very disappointed we haven't been able to publish it in Indonesian yet.
Wow, it's going to be amazing and big project, Pak Paul. And please let us know when you are coming to Indonesia, especially Jakarta, ya Mbak Yayu ya. Now I moved to South Tangerang, Pak Paul, West East Jakarta.
I hope so. I hope I'm there. Look, this is the longest time that I've spent away from Indonesia. So
since COVID, especially?
Since COVID. So just before COVID, I was in Indonesia. And then after COVID, so now over 3 years, I think, isn't it, since COVID? Wow. So I hope I will be there, maybe by the end of this year or January or February, that I'll be over there.
Yeah, but please let us know. And Mbak Yayu is in South Jakarta and I am in South Tangerang, but still, can reach to Jakarta. I actually work in Monash, Indonesia, but still contract. I mean, still not permanent position yet. Let me see in the future whether I'm going to PhD
Fingers
or
crossed.
Permanent. There is Monash Indonesia, Pak Paul, in BSD City, and if you came here as well, please let us know and campus visit.
Definitely. Yayu, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if Mr. Paul come to Jakarta or maybe in other city, I'd like to be your guide and be a very nice host. Maybe I will treat you some traditional food.
Wow, okay. I'm ready to come. Yeah. What I would like to do is bring my Trugo equipment over so that we could play games.
Yeah, we can try.
But it's very heavy, so I don't know whether I have... the mallets. I should get one. I've got one here. Oh, I've already got a mallet here. Oh,
I see.
I've got my mallet. Yeah. So we actually have our last practice this afternoon. That's before the season starts.
Okay. Anna, I think it's already 50 students.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I think the others will be joining later. Yeah. Yes. 52. That's great. Oh.
Can we just start, Anna?
Yeah, I think you can, start greeting the participants. And I can start.
Okay. Mr. Paul, can I open this webinar?
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Silakan.
Iya, terima kasih. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, students here. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for your coming in this early morning, I think, because some of you maybe are still enjoying your holiday because your classes hasn't started yet. But this morning, we have a very special opportunity to welcome very special speakers, because we cannot have this kind of opportunity every day. So guys, I beg you to enjoy this webinar until the end of this webinar. Okay, maybe you can take some foods, or maybe you can take a cup of tea, so you can really enjoy this webinar. So to make it short, this morning we have a bilateral webinar The title is about Can Indonesians Learn English Through Australian Sports? And our speakers today is, first of all, we have Mr. Paul Thomas. Okay, let's welcome Mr. Paul. So he is affiliated researcher of Monash University. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Paul. And then the second speaker is Miss, okay, I say Mrs. Anna because she already married, okay, Mrs. Anna. So she is the alumni of Monash University. So our main topic today, actually, we will talk about Australian sport. Some of you maybe already knew, yeah. Maybe some of you, you who are staying in Jakarta, maybe ever saw advertisement, maybe in Instagram, AFL, yeah. So that's kind of Australian sports. And our discussion this morning is that we will discuss whether can we, Indonesian, learn English through Australian sport. So to make it short, I'll give the opportunity to Mr. Paul to share anything you want to share to us this morning. Please, the screen is yours, Mr. Paul.
Thank you very much, Yayuk, for that wonderful introduction. And I do feel a bit special having this chance to speak about a topic which I really enjoyed developing over the last few years as both a language teacher and just as an ordinary person who likes to play games. So today I'm looking at about, I think 50 minutes, is that right, that I've got to go through this. I know that many of you will have excellent English, but sometimes when you're following something like this on a screen and through audio, which is not always the best, it is difficult in another language. I know I would find it difficult in Indonesian, even though I've studied Indonesian for many, many years. So I will try and speak not too fast, but sometimes I might get a little excited. So you'll have to bear with me. Please ask questions in the question time. I really would enjoy a discussion. I would love to be in Jakarta, but unfortunately, I haven't been there since COVID, but I am planning to go there at the end of this year. Okay, let's start our topic. Now, one of the things is there's this tradition now in Australia that we have what is called an acknowledgement of country. An acknowledgement of country is for the speaker to acknowledge the land, the original people who inhabited the land which I am speaking to you from. The interesting thing from a sport point of view is that now, before any grand final, before any final of football or cricket or any other sport, this acknowledgement of country will be read out, or there will be a welcome to country, which means people from the Indigenous community will be welcomed to the sporting field, and they will have a smoking ceremony before the sport begins. So in that tradition, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which that I'm speaking today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. This is also very common now, but particularly when we're speaking about history, and some of that will come up during my presentation. So we have to remember that I am speaking in the context of a very special week in Australia, and particularly in Melbourne, and that is that this Saturday is the Australian Football League Grand Final. To give you an indication how big it is, we will have a public holiday. So even though it's just a sporting event, we will have a public holiday on Friday. There will be a parade through the streets. Actually, they're going to do a parade along the river this year, all the way to the stadium. And that's just on the Friday. And events will happen all the way through this week leading up to the grand final. There are two teams that are going to play in the grand final. One is the Swans, the Sydney Swans. They're a team from Sydney, and the other team is Geelong, which are the Cats, which is a small city. Geelong is a small city just west of Melbourne. Now, everybody is going to know about that in Australia. Everyone will know about the grand final coming up. There'll be lots of TV shows about it. But there is another sporting event that's going to happen, which hardly anybody will know about, and that is the beginning of the Trugo season. It is the complete opposite, a very small sport played in a very small area of Melbourne. And we're going to use these two sports as our example. So I'll explain a little bit about them. Now, one thing I should say is give you this warning of bias. Normally, bias is considered a bad thing, particularly in academic work. We don't like to see bias at all. But the strange thing in sport, bias is celebrated. People embrace bias. They take a side. And there's a phrase which we use sometimes for people who are just maybe a little bit over the top. And that is the one-eyed supporter. A one-eyed supporter only sees his team's achievements and often fails to recognise the other team's achievements. So they're a one-eyed supporter, they just go. And I like these little T-shirts that they have here. Now here you'll see the Geelong side, which I said is one of the teams in the grand final. You can see the T-shirt is really quite boring. The colours are plain, not very interesting. Whereas the Swans T-shirt is very interesting. I find it subtle, in fact, quite cool. And that's the one I would buy. Also, because today's a little bit cool, I might put on a scarf that I have here just to the side to make myself a little bit more comfortable. I do have my cap, my beanie, ready for the grand final. So as you can see, I am almost a one-eyed supporter. Now, as I said, this bias is really strange in football. It's part of the culture of football. Our politicians try to avoid bias, particularly about cultural issues or religion, for example. So a prime minister in Australia would not be expected to talk about their religion, but they are expected to take a team, a football team, which is a little bit strange because you would think their supporters might be disappointed if they chose the wrong team. But each prime minister will always declare what team they support. And here we see a few of them. I won't go through all of them, but there's Anthony Albanese is the current Australian Prime Minister, and his scarf tells us he supports a team Hawthorn, which is very disappointing, and I hope he eventually gets over it. He is from Sydney, so I'm very disappointed he's not supporting the Sydney Swans. There are other people here, and it's also interesting that the last few prime ministers in Australia have all come from Sydney. People like Anthony Albanese, Scott Morrison, and Tony Abbott are all Australian prime ministers who've come from Sydney. And Sydney is not a strong Australian football area. Traditionally, they play rugby league or rugby union, but they do have a very strong AFL side called Sydney Swans. So there's lots of debates sometimes whether the prime ministers are just doing it to make them seem more human, and maybe they don't really support that particular team. But there are prime ministers who've been very, very clear, very strong supporters of AFL. And here was Australia's first woman prime minister, Julia Gillard. She was a true supporter of the Western Bulldogs, which is a team here in Melbourne. And I'm telling you this because it shows you there is an incredible depth of interest in sport in Australia. And politicians can't ignore it. Most Australians can't ignore it. So that's why, one of the reasons it's an interesting topic to look at if we're going to study the culture and language of Australia. And this all starts at a very early age. I was looking at some Javanese traditions where the baby has to choose objects in front of them. That might tell us about their future. And many parents here, they like to buy babies their football scarf to try and influence what team they will choose. And in this case, this poor baby here has the scarf of the Brisbane Lions. So there's no sitting on the fence. To sit on the fence means that you're ambivalent, that you are neither here nor there with a team. In Australia, you have to choose a team.
That's clear.
So here are the two Australian sports that we'll use as examples. The first is the most well-known. It's called Australian football, often Aussie rules, and quite a lot now it's called AFL. So the name is a bit strange because that refers to a specific league, but nevertheless, it's called AFL by a lot of people. As you can see, it doesn't really have a specific name. So quite interesting from our language point of view, it's just called football. And it depends where you are in Australia, what football will mean. To some people, it will mean Aussie rules, AFL. To some people, it will mean soccer, just like in Indonesia. And to other people, it will mean rugby league or rugby union. Depends where you are in Australia. As you can see on the left hand of your screen, it's very unusual because it's not played on a square. It's played on an oval. And it takes that oval from cricket, so they were playing on cricket fields. It's also a very large oval, which makes it a bit difficult to find places to play in Indonesia. So it can be up to 185 metres long. It's the largest football ground of all the footballs in the world. It also has the largest number of players. So there's 18 players for every side, for each side, I should say, playing. So that means that there's a lot of players, but it's a very fast game. It is being clocked or measured as the fastest football in the world, meaning the ball moves from one end to the other in the fastest possible way. Simple aim, you've got to kick the football through these sets of goalposts. And if you kick it through without anyone touching, it's 6 points. But if it hits the post or it goes through the short post and the long post, it's a behind and it's only 1 point. That's it. I won't go into any more details about it because we're not here to really learn about all the rules. We're here to talk about language and sport. Now, the second, as I said, most people will see this. These fields are everywhere across Australia. They'll be very familiar with it. The second sport, I won't worry about. I'll just jump over that. By the way, it is a very large sport in Australia, so over 1.2 million players. 1.2 million players. And while it was originally for men, it's now played by all genders and a much wider age group as well. In fact, there's many people who are much older playing Australian football now than was the case before. The interesting thing, again, from a cultural point of view, is that it was very regional. So up until the 1980s, we had this thing called the Barassi line, which ran through Australia. If you were on the right-hand side or the northeast side, most people followed rugby league. If you were on the other side, the west side, the south side, you followed Australian football. And here is some interesting language, again, because sport is full of colloquial language. It was called, so if you wanted to insult someone who was playing rugby league because you were on the south or the west side of the line, you might call rugby league cross-country wrestling. And that was seen as an insult. So the people on the northeast side would reply with their insult, which was aerial ping pong. So because I grew up in Sydney, on the other side of the line, my father always called it aerial ping pong, even though I played it. I never remember him calling it Aussie rules. He just called it aerial ping pong. As I said, meant as an insult. Oops. Now, Trugo is a completely different sport. Hardly anybody knows it in Australia. It's played only in Melbourne, with one exception. And the aim of Trugo is to take a mallet, right? And there's the mallet there on the right-hand side. Take the mallet and take a ring, and then you strike the rubber ring through a set of goals down the other end of the court. So again, most sports have a simple objective. The skill is trying to get continual success, trying to get the rings through. Now, in a game, normally there are 8 players and we play across 2 courts. So this is a much smaller sport. The courts are usually referred to in imperial measures, 90 foot long, which is about 27 meters. So this is why it's a sport I would like to share with Indonesians, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to find a small space and to play a game like Trugo. And one interesting fact is that I found a small hamlet in central Java called Trugo. And I don't know, no relation to the sport. It just happens to be a place in central Java called Trugo. I would love to play a game there one day. The goalpost, the other thing to know about Trugo is it has come from a railway tradition. So the court being 90 foot long, 27 meters, is the length of a piece of rail or 2 pieces of rail welded together. And the width of the goals, 5'9" or 1.7 meters, is the width of the rails in Victoria. So they've taken the measurements from these railway measurements. And when the game was first invented, it was played by a lot of railway workers. Now, I think I said so many, 1.2 million people play Australian football, Aussie rules. Well, Trugo has only 85 players in the world. So it's rarer than the Sumatran tiger. And that's where, for Trugo, we're looking at more preserving a tradition which is somewhat endangered, where Aussie rules is very, very healthy. And there's some extra information there, but we don't need to go into that. The main thing to know is that originally it was for people 60 years and over. And now in recent years, it's been opened up and we have a lot more young players participating. So it's cross-generational and the teams are mixed. Unlike football, the teams consist of both men and women. Here is why I say Trugo is quite rare. This is Melbourne down here where I'm speaking to you from. And here is the area that Trugo is played in, just in the inner suburbs of Melbourne. And that's why a lot of Australians don't know about the sport, even though it's existed since the 1920s. So it's almost 100 years old. When we're talking of learning a language through a sport, one word comes to mind, and that's motivation. This is the key to language learning, motivation. It is more important than grammar. It is more important than structure or anything else, because without motivation, we will never see the distance. We'll never make it, because learning a language is a long distance event. So what we want to do is we're really quite free in language learning to do any activity that gets us motivated to continue to use the language. And that's one of the reasons I think sport should be considered. So this is a few words, this is a few things that I feel motivated about. First of all, motivation is very personal, which is one of the problems when you're devising a curriculum for language teaching, is that each of the students have their own tastes and their own interests. And we've got to try and capture those interests. So I follow my interests, my passion, dreams, and curiosity. These are all part of motivation, a much simpler way to think about it. And also people being motivated, and I know I'm motivated by building up relations with people, cultures, and histories. Those are some of the things that motivate me. And because it's personal, I should say here that we talk often in motivation about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So in terms of intrinsic motivation, in sport, you just enjoy playing. It's not because you think you're going to earn money or you're going to be the best ever. It's just something that you enjoy. Where extrinsic motivation, people are generally fixed on earning an income, or they want to just win an award. An interesting case for us in sport in terms of motivation, which is such a big thing in sport, so there's a nice overlap with language learning, is an Australian player called Nick Kyrgios. He's usually, because of his last name, seen as Australian Greek, but really he is an Australian Greek Malay. His mother's Malay. In fact, he is descended from the royal houses of Selangor, and it goes further back. He does speak Malay and some Greek, so you would be able to have a few words with him in Malay. But he's quite famous and quite controversial as someone who was seen as extrinsic motivated by money, in this case, that you could earn a very, very good income from playing tennis. He may not be so open about talking in that way these days, but it's an interesting debate, and that's what we're looking for in terms of language. We're looking for interesting debates that come from sport. Again, because something's so personal, we usually start with our own history. What sports did you play when you were a kid? What sports did you play at school? These are quite important and will be part of your background as you come into it. I put mine up. I ran as an athlete in middle distance, and I also played Aussie rules, as I already mentioned, even though it was in Sydney at a time when there was no Sydney Swans, there was no Sydney team. I still played there. In my school, it was strictly rugby union, but I formed a rebel team. So this was, some of my school teachers were very unhappy about this team because they did not want to have Aussie rules in our school. again, another little cultural clash. These days, as you're probably starting to become aware, I play Trugo, and we made the grand final in the last season, and I still run. But what I wanted to do is take these sports and bring them together with my language interests. And I started to do that, particularly in athletics. So I've met up with Indonesian athletes. On the left-hand side, you can see Dede Irawati. This is in masters athletics. That is people usually 30 or 35 and over. These are the competitions. This was the World Masters Games. So people came together. These are people who are not playing at the elite level. But and we did some radio interviews. So if you get this, if you get a copy of this, you'll be able to hear the radio interview with SBS Indonesian. So we did our interview in Indonesian about the sport and about meeting up in Auckland, New Zealand. And in this, on the right-hand side, was an opportunity I had to run in the Indonesian Open in Jakarta. Unfortunately, I was the only Australian in the team. There was only one Australian there, and that was me. The rest mainly came from India and Sri Lanka and Singapore, so quite a variety of runners. And hopefully this year, I'm going to get a chance to have another kick. I've had one kick with the Krakatau's, but I hope to go and see them more often because my son, who is on the right-hand side, wants to play with the Krakatau's. And he speaks some Indonesian. And so I'm very curious to see, as he meets more Indonesians, how much he'll use Indonesian. He's a bit shy of speaking it, particularly in public. But this will be an interesting experiment in terms of today's topic, a very personal one, to see how much my son will benefit in terms of his Indonesian. And finally, from a personal point of view, I'm also interested in sport as an exchange. So it's like our language. There is no point, we don't need any more English speakers in the world. So it's no point Indonesians just learning English because we have lots of English speakers. We don't need any more. And that's the same I told my Australian students learning Indonesian. There were already enough Indonesian speakers. We didn't need any more Indonesian speakers. We've got nearly 300 million Indonesian Malay speakers. So what was the point of learning Indonesian or the point of learning English for Indonesians? It was because what we don't have are people who can move between cultures, who have both language, who can go from English to Indonesian, Indonesian to English. We don't have enough Australians who speak Indonesian and can move between two worlds, an English-speaking world and an Indonesian-speaking world. So language learning is always about an exchange. That's where it's valuable. If you're just in one culture, that makes you a less valuable person, in my opinion. So I think this would be interesting to see these sorts of exchanges. So I had my students playing sepak takraw, and we incorporated that into our language learning. And of course, we've talked about Indonesians learning Aussie rules. And there are the Garuda, which is the Indonesian national side, which I was able to take my class to. So I took my Indonesian class to go and watch them play Aussie rules. And my students have had to present on Aussie rules, but speak about it in Indonesian. And then they've also had to look at Indonesian games and learn the language of those Indonesian games. I'm particularly interested in getting Indonesians to come over and do some demonstrations of gasing, the spinning tops, which I think would be a very interesting part of the exchange. It's also fair to recognise the long history of Australian-Indonesian sporting ties. I haven't found exactly where they start. I know by the 1920s, there were Australian soccer sides going over to what was called the Netherlands East Indies and playing soccer with Indonesians there. And I should say Indonesians because I've read the reports and I know that they weren't just playing with Dutch people. in the Netherlands. They were playing with Indonesians, and they played Chinese Indonesian sides as well. And that started around the 1920s. In the 1940s was the first Australian football games in Indonesia, because we had Australian troops in Kalimantan. And there's an interesting story there, because they were not required any longer for the war effort, but they were there just as a security issue. Just towards the end of the war, they started to build football grounds, play football. They were also learning Indonesian and Malay while they were there as well. And in more contemporary times, we have strong associations with the Indonesian Cricket Association, and now, of course, even AFL Indonesia. In terms of language, an approach to language learning, we've got to consider two things. So having said all of that, we've got two things to consider, and one is the practical side.
Saya Elvi, Bu, dari Sastra Inggris.
I can just hear a lot of talk. Some people, you might have to mute your microphones. So on the practical side, yep, we want people out there actually playing the games and learning English while they're responding with action. But that's part of it. And then on the side, particularly, say, from a university point of view, or students at a university point of view, we're hoping that they'll also balance that with cultural learning about different sports. And we've got to take a very broad view of what sport is. So here I'm talking about sport in history, in literature, in linguistics, in art, and regionalism, and even the politics of sport. So there's lots of interesting things to explore. This, by the way, down the bottom is a Melbourne University group which I had. So I did a seminar where we looked at the history of Trugo, and then we were able, so we did that in the clubhouse. They had the lecture in the clubhouse, and then we were able to go straight out of the clubhouse and have a game of Trugo so they could experience the game. So this is about broadening the idea of what you think of when we say sport. So a rethinking of sport as a cultural phenomenon. And we see sport in our films, we see it in our art, we see it in our literature. So it's quite interesting to bring those things into the language learning classroom. One of the films I used for my Indonesian class was a film called Romeo and Juliet. It's quite an old film now, but some of you may have heard of it, about a couple, one from Jakarta, one from Bandung, who fall in love. And of course, it's this parallel to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. There's quite a lot of violence in the film, so lots of things to discuss there, but my students found it very interesting. And there's an example of Australian football in film, in an Australian film called Australian Rules, which dealt a lot with racism and also living in a sort of isolated area in Australia. Those two pieces of art are pictures of Trugo that have been drawn. In particular, the one up the top here is a public mural in a suburb called Yarraville, which is believed to be the birthplace of Trugo, and I pass it quite often. I'm sorry, I look a bit like a bank robber there, but we'll put that down to COVID. How are we going? Hopefully, it's hard talking to a camera. Sayangnya saya tidak bisa di situ supaya bisa omong langsung sama kalian. Di sini saya hanya menghadapi kamera saja. Jadi kalau ada pertanyaan, jangan lupa. So we're talking about cultural learning. Here we are. There's all sorts of questions that come up for the language learner when you're approaching a topic like sport. And I put some down here. I don't need to go through each of those questions. If I just take one or two examples, one of the things we'd want to know about before we started learning another culture is, how do you feel about sport? How do you perceive sport? So we have to start with you first, and your culture first, and then we take the next step, which is looking at the other culture. Why is sport an important feature in Australian culture? We know it is. We saw even right up to the Prime Minister level, them having to choose a team. It would just be controversial if they said, if a Prime Minister said, oh, look, I'm not interested in football, it would be a very controversial statement. Would be interesting to see how people would react. So there's a whole bunch of questions that come up. At the moment, a lot about women in sport, and also the idea of sports being very specific to a certain area, part of a tradition of a region. Because we're now, a lot of people are so used to globalization that we get to miss out on some things which are very, very local in terms of culture. With that in mind, there's been quite a strong movement now to preserve regional games and sports that are part of the culture of very small areas, not national sports necessarily, but sports which are traditional sports from different regions. And the United Nations has a group called Traditional Sports and Games, often using the acronym TSG. And there's a quote there from the Director General in 2003, talking about the celebration of Indigenous and traditional forms of sports and games which derive from the roots of many different communities, being a growing feature of contemporary culture. So this helps us, to see how worthwhile sport might be in terms of a topic for language learning. And there are lots of festivals now, so even very, very small sports now can go along to these festivals and showcase. This one was in Italy, but there are others in Germany and different countries. There was one also in Jakarta under an organization, international organization. I think they're based in Switzerland, called Tafisa, which originally was about health, but now has taken on board this idea of preserving traditional games and celebrating traditional games. Needless to say, in Australia, we have some traditional games, but not so many, not many with a high profile. Boomerang Championships is one, but I don't know anyone who plays this in Australia. It seems more popular in the United States, in India, and I know that Indonesia is also an associate of the International Boomerang Association. So someone in Indonesia must be throwing boomerangs. And it's a competition, it's a sport, not just throwing the boomerang, which is based around these scores for the boomerang landing close to you or further away from you. And there are different types of rounds, but I won't go into that too much. Another indigenous sport was known as mangrove. And mangrove has been argued by some historians as part of a predecessor to Aussie rules, to AFL. Some sports historians argue against it. Some say, yes, it did have a big influence. But not many, unlike other countries, in the Indigenous games have not become particularly popular in Australia. So Trugo is, as a sport, in terms of traditional sports and games, it fits the criteria very, very well. And it is a sport that we're trying to preserve as part of a cultural heritage. As I said, there's only about 85 players now. Australian football is an Australian sport, and so it also is a sport that is celebrated under this banner. But Trugo is perhaps fills the criteria a little better in terms of something very, very local and gives us an insight into a community's culture, which is really distinct from other sports. There were lots of other things I could talk about here related to its origins in the railway workshops as a working class sport. So it was shunned by people, middle class people, upper class people during the periods in the 30s and the 40s because it was seen as very, very working class. But now it's become open to all, and even juniors down here, we're hoping to get involved. Okay, talking about the practical, there is a problem, and that's our brain. Our brain, or if you're learning a language at university as an adult, there is a problem that your brain already has words for everything that you can see. It already has a word for a ceiling, for a wall, for a table. I'm just looking around me now. So it often doesn't want to learn another word for all those things. It seems impractical. I already have langit-langit, tembok, atau dinding, komputer, meja. It doesn't want to put another layer on top of that because it wants to be as efficient as it can. So we've got to find out ways of convincing our brain to take new words for things it already has. And an interesting thing is that once we are adults, we store our second language in a different part of the brain. And this is where this physical activity, going out and learning a game and taking part in a game, helps us, because now you're engaging different parts of the brain in an activity with language integrated into it. So if you throw a ball or handball something, a ball to somebody, and tell them, catch it, using the English catch it, it doesn't matter that there are other words inside you like tangkap, or lepas, let go the ball. It doesn't matter those words are there because of the immediacy of the physical reaction that you need to respond to someone throwing a ball or you throwing a ball. It means that it helps the brain attach those new words to an action rather than translation. So this idea of out there playing a sport helps us avoid translation quite a lot in a way that we often can't do when we're doing academic work. And this is found in quite a lot of teaching methodologies. So there was back in the 1970s, but it's still used to some degree, a thing called total physical response, or TPR. And TPR was getting students to physically respond to instructions from the teacher, or in our case, a tutor. So they might give them a series of orders to stand up or sit down, to go over and pick something up, but the students had to respond. It wasn't writing down in a book something. They had to link a physical action to the language that was being used. So when we talk about going out and playing a sport to learn a language, this is quite in tune with the essence of TPR. As we moved on to areas like communicative approach, it was about making communication the priority. That is, language grammar was important, syntax was important, pronunciation was important, but it wasn't the priority. The priority was to have meaningful language which we could communicate with. So that's one of the useful things in terms of both culture and also that physical approach. At the moment, there's a lot of interest in incorporating intercultural methods of language teaching, where culture is the learning priority. And if you're talking about culture as a learning priority, then we've got to find specific cultures to talk about, right? So we don't want to learn English as a sort of generic language. We want to look at English in particular cultures so that we can learn about them. Naturally, language itself is of great interest and is very confusing sometimes to people in the sporting area because it involves a lot of colloquial language, sometimes a lot of slang, sometimes even swearing if you get overexcited. And it's hard to know exactly what's happening, but that sporting language does play a role in our everyday lives. For instance, if someone comes up to me after the weekend and says, "How did the Swannies go on the weekend?" that might be because they're interested in football, but it may not be. It might be because they're just trying to be friendly. So the context plays a huge role. How did the Swannies go on the weekend might translate as "Apa kabar?" It's really just saying, how are you? They don't really want to know about whether the Swans won by 20 points, whether they're in the grand final. They might have another reason to talk to you. But it's a way of what we call breaking the ice so that you can come into the office, come into the factory and say something to someone so that you can be friends. And it may not have sport as an objective. Other phrases can come in like, "Don't handball the problem to me." Handball is how we pass in Aussie rules. To handball, you're not allowed to throw in Australian football. You have to hold the ball and punch it if you want to pass it. But that's come into general Australian English, as in people who don't want to deal with a problem, so they give the problem to somebody else. And in this case, I don't know. It's not my fault. That problem was handballed to me by such and such. Another example of how this comes in, people using language, sports language, in a totally different context, is this historical example. The Prime Minister during the Second World War was John Curtin. And here he is talking about a time when Australia was under threat. Many Australians believed the Japanese were going to invade Australia. So he's wanting to boost people's confidence. He's wanting to talk to them in a straightforward way. And so this is how he sums up developments in the war. He goes, "If I likened the Pacific War to a football match, I can say that the first half is over. We have kicked off after interval, and we are going to carry the ball into enemy territory for a smashing victory." How strange is that? He's talking about really turning the Japanese back, but he's using football language to describe it. Here's a more modern example. In 2014, the then Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, said he would shirt front Russian President Vladimir Putin over the shooting down of the Malaysian Airlines in the Ukraine. So it's still quite a relevant topic today. Shirt front was a phrase which is believed to come from Australian football, meaning, and there's a Macquarie Dictionary definition, meant a head-on charge aimed at bumping an opponent to the ground. So you went straight for your opponent and you knocked them over. But here it's being used in a kind of coarse way, as people often saw it as a threat to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin laughed it off, apparently, but it took a lot of news agencies by surprise, and the BBC had to explain to British listeners what shirt front was as a term or phrase. And this became quite popular, as you can see. Yes, they did put a T-shirt out about it as well. "I'm going to shirt front Mr. Putin." So 2 examples of how language comes in to our general means of language, our general communication. There is, of course, when we're just talking about pure language, the fun of language in sport. The way the commentators speak or call a match can be quite funny, entertaining, intriguing sometimes as well. And here are just some examples that would come from a match of Australian football. Khan plus the name of your team. So on Saturday, I'll be going, Khan the Swannies. This is sort of colloquial language. It's very lively, and it is a nice contrast to formal language that you are normally learning in English language classes. And there's phrases which I've always liked, things like playing a blinder. Blinder is to be blind, is not to be able to see. So why does playing a blinder mean to play really well? Some people might interpret it as something negative, something that they can't see. But playing a blinder is to play extremely well. And at this time, heading into the grand final, and I'm going to have to finish up soon, so I'm almost finished, but going into the grand final, you'll have a lot of people which they call bandwagon supporters. That is, they didn't follow the teams very much. They didn't follow the teams very much during the season, but because the Swans are in the grand final or the Cats are in the grand final, they start becoming strong supporters just at the last moment. These are called bandwagon supporters. And there's a few others. I also like worm burner. When you kick very low, it means that any of the worms that are popping up will be burnt by the football as it goes past. I find that a very funny expression. So here are some final thoughts about learning English through Australian sports. Things just to think about. One is that learning a language through physical activity is in accord with many contemporary methodologies. So when we look at ways to learn, it fits very well. Secondly, it engages students directly in a specific culture. I'm very keen to look. Sometimes I worry English is taught too much as a generic language. They learn American English or they learn British English, but there is no such thing as American English or British English. If you went to the United States, you would find a different form of English in different regions. The same in Britain, even more so in the United Kingdom. So in Australia, it's a little bit easier because the accent remains the same across the continent. Though there are different accents, they're not regional accents. But having said that, the language still has very specific phrases and words that belong to a particular state or city that people live in. So I'm not so much a fan of teaching English as a generic language. The other thing is that it raises lots of interesting questions about the purpose of sport and its influence on the target culture. And given that a good methodology is going to prioritise the learning of that culture, this is something to take on board. The other thing, just a practical thing, is that the degree of language you use is easy to adjust. You can tell people, well, pick up the mallet, pick up the ring, hit the ring to the goals down the other end. It's a nice, simple, instructional language. But there are new objects like the ring. When journalists first described the ring in Trugo, they weren't sure what to call it, and there were many terms, puck, etc. But so you were still learning very specific terms. The other thing is that you get out of the classroom in terms of going and playing the sport, and the classroom is a very artificial environment. We don't learn culture very well inside four walls. It's a much better thing to get out and actually do something, meet people. And I guess my final point is that really the relationship between Australia and Indonesia is often dominated by politics. This is not uncommon when you have two countries next to each other. We have a political border, and we have to deal with everyday matters, things that affect us. So decisions that are made in Indonesia are going to impact on Australia. Decisions made in Australia are going to impact on Indonesia. And so while that's important and really of great interest, we need some balance, and sport provides a balance where we can communicate with each other over something which is an enjoyable and hopefully a relaxing activity. And that finishes my presentation for today. Of course, I have only one thing to say. Yes, you can learn English through Australian sports. And of course, I have to say, go the Swannies. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much, Mr. Paul, for your sharing session. Well, I extremely happy to have you here because your presentation is equal with my one semester material, Mr. Paul.
Oh, good. Seharusnya saya menggunakan lebih banyak bahasa Indonesia, tetapi saya khawatir waktunya terbatas.
No, I have much time for you. Unlimited time for you. Okay, me personally have some questions, many questions actually for you, but I have to keep the question. So now I move to Miss Anna first. So maybe Miss Anna can inform technically if we Indonesian students want to know and want to practice this sport, where and how we can join that kind of community. Time is yours, please.
Okay. All right. Paul, thank you so much. Would you like to stop your share first, and then I will share my screen?
There we go.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, and I'm really, excited for today, and I also excited listening about Paul presentations, and it really give me wonderful insight. And today I'm not a speaker. Basically, I would like to give a testimonial. So when I was studying in Australia in Monash University, I took a Master of TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other language. And then, so this is very important. I went to Australia, English-speaking country, and I want to learn English there. And then the thing is, I think better learning English is through experience as well, not just in campus sitting on the chair, but I should join activity outside campus. And then sport is the key as well, because then I met a sport club in Australia. One of them is Krakatoa's football club. I also try other sport like hockey in Monash sport. And also I really excited to read some articles about Australian sport. But based on my experience, I spent many weekend playing with Krakatoa's football club, which also Pak Paul has mentioned before about Krakatoa's football club. And of course, it's really also amazing to know about Trugo. But in this time, I just want to focus on FL, because when I arrived in Indonesia here, I also joined the club of FL, Jakarta Bintang. So for those, who are here, if you want to try footy AFL, there is Jakarta Bintang in Indonesia. And also, if you are coming to Australia, of course, let's join Krakatoas, and then let's try Trugo as well. So this is going to be an amazing experience for Indonesians and Australian relationships, especially through sport. And of course, through joining sport, it improved my English conversation, because from this one you can see I have Australian friends, and they are welcome, they are friendly. So even I speak some local language, because in campus in Monash mostly the lecturers speak in formal way. So when outside campus, and then for example, my friend, some of them in the first time they say Hoayang, and I still like, you know, thinking Hoayang, what does it mean? But it's actually how are you? But they said it in a informal or slang way, like Hoayang, gitu. And then footy, basically it is from football, and then wow, football, and then become footy, and then I learned some you know, slang words through sport, and also some other words like let's eat chocolate, and then become chocky, then biscuit bicky, and then so many things. Really nice to know Australian word, Australian slangs outside campus, and also like this, you know, I have conversation with friend with Australian. Even there is Clarice. Clarice is also a student in Monash, and then she went to Indonesia several times. So this is, you know, develop my language through experience, through join Krakatoas. And then after I finished my study from Monash in 2018, I went home to Central Java first because my hometown is there. And then the connection with sport of Australia still bring me to mingle with Australia. So when I went to Jakarta, or right now I am in Jakarta actually, South Tangerang, West is Jakarta. So we have the club here in Indonesia, especially IFL, Jakarta Bintang, Bali Gekos, Borneo Bears. And hopefully there will be some FL clubs or clinic in other city in Indonesia, or maybe UNAS. Yeah, if you want to have a FL training or club, maybe just let us know. And then this is one of my experience when I was in Jakarta. So I'm lucky because when I have communities through sport, and then it bring me to you know, other experience. You know, there is you know, this is some Australians, and then I still practice my English because it is important when you are in Indonesia, you get back to your you know, your city or your hometown. Maybe your English will lose because you don't have practice much. But when you have Australian friends, you still connected with neighbor country Australia, and then I have friends and they are friendly, and they also welcome to still join you know, sport club, and then I still practice my English. So this is one of the event of Jakarta Bintangs in Gelora Bung Karno Senayan, ya. And then this is also when I was at my hometown, Central Java, before the COVID-19. I practiced my English with my students in Salatiga. Of course, this is also not just sport. Basically, this is also to develop their English, because when I introduce the girls in Salatiga through sport, through footy, Australian sport, this is footy, they learn some English word like hand pass, kicking, marking, and then they appreciate their friend like good job, well done. So at least, yeah, we use our English, and then it's really more exciting for the girls, for the student in Indonesia while learning English and practice sport, and their confidence improve. Yeah, and they are confident, their communication skills develop. Yeah. And this is also with the help of IFL Indonesia. There is Barry, but Barry is volunteer here. And then, yeah, this is in Central Java, some pictures. For those who want to join FL, please let us know in Jakarta. And of course, when we are coming to Australia, I want to get back with FL Club. And I support for Collingwood, but my husband support for Fitness One, so we still watch FL match on FL streaming online, and also we are excited too, especially me, to learn other sport and how to link with culture, language, and the bilateral relations Australia and Indonesia, and also to know Trogo today is really amazing, Papa. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mbak Yayu. I think that is enough for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, it seems the chairwoman of this department already joined. Can I say hi first? Hello, Ma'am Tuti. Masih di mute, Ma'am Tuti? Masih di mute, Ma'am Tuti?
Yeah, okay. Hello, Ibu Yayu. I'm so sorry because just finished my presentation in Mandua Kampar Riau.
Okay, it's okay. Please, time is yours. Before we go to Q&A, I give your time first, Ma'am Tuti.
Okay, so sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mrs. Ayu, for giving me opportunity. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Paul Thomas from Monash University. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Bu Tuti.
Hello, so sorry I'm coming late because just finished my presentation in Mandua Kampar Riau. I'm not staying in Jakarta.
That's all right. I can present it all again to you when I come to Jakarta.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Paul Thomas from Monash University, who has given your time to provide us knowledge deal with learning English through Australian sport. Nice to meet you, Thomas, once again. Sorry. Okay, the second one to Ibu Anna Surjanto as the representative alumni of Monash University. Maaf, Ibu Anna just join the meeting.
Nggak apa-apa Ibu, terima kasih sudah.
Iya, sama-sama. Mohon maaf ya Ibu, saya di Riau baru saja menyelesaikan my presentation pengabdian kepada masyarakat. Jadi luar biasa ini terbagi di 3 lokasi ya. Our Zoom meeting this time in Riau, Jakarta, and Australia. Thank you so much. And all beloved students of English study program, especially for new students. Well, this is a wonderful beginning where UNAS has the opportunity conducting a webinar in the field of sport with Australian. We usually have webinars or public lecturing in the field of literature, linguistics, and culture. However, I'm sure this activity will give positive impact to all participants in enhancing our English skills, especially related to Australian sport and hopefully Australian culture. And for Mr. Thomas, just for your information, we also provide Australian culture course. Yeah, so I hope we can increase our collaboration maybe for the next webinar or the next opportunity you are available. Yeah. You don't mind to give any presentation or as a guest lecture, yeah, to give knowledge regarding the culture, Australian culture. Thank you.
Okay, Ma'am Tuti, are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yep, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ma'am Tuti. Okay, so now I move to discussion session. So I see some students already prepare the questions. So I give opportunity to Alpha. Are you here, Alpha?
Yes. Should I turn on the camera?
Yes, of course, please.
Hi. Here's can I ask my question now? Hello? Hello?
Yes, please. Yes, please,
okay.
Alpha.
To Mr. Paul Thomas, my question is, there's 2 questions. One, what is the difference between Australian football and rugby? And 2, what's the difference between trugo and croquet, which is, you know, kind of like the same game, but you used it on a park, like a picnic?
Okay, so I can answer straight away?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Okay, so Australian football is one of the oldest codified football in the world. So it's surprising because we're a relatively young country, but Australian football was codified in the late 19th century. So about the same time as rugby and American football were starting to come together. Australian football had already established a club. The big differences is that one, there is no offside in Australian football. So as a player, you have to be aware of everyone around you. Also, in Australia, the rugby's split into two. So rugby union, we're talking now in the early 20th century, became a kind of upper class sport. So it was played in private schools, and a rugby league was seen as a more working class game. And Australian football didn't have that split. So some sports historians suggest that's why the crowds are bigger, and also that it has a higher participation from women, both as spectators and as also players. So rugby is, depends a lot on offside. So you always have to pass the ball backwards. Where Australian football, it's very open, and you move forward and back at quite a lot of speed. There are lots of differences. It's hard to go into all the details. Going on to Trugo and croquet, Trugo has descended in one way from croquet, but it's quite a lot different. To start with, it's one of the only sports, and I haven't found another sport, but as far as I know, it's the only sport where you don't face the goals when you're shooting for a goal. You face backwards. And this wasn't the case in the early days of Trugo, so it looked a bit more like croquet. It actually looked more like the sports that preceded croquet. So there is a sport from Italy in the Renaissance period, in the 15th, 16th century, called Palamaglio from Naples. And it's a little bit similar to that. And there's a very strange connection I found recently. Another sport in Italy around the 16th, 17th century, which was called trucco, which sounds so similar. But the fundamental difference for Trugo is that we do not face the goals. And we are striking goals, where croquet, you move around the court, where Trugo, you have goals directly down from where you are, and you shoot down for a goal. And you only have one shot to hit the goal. You can't hit the ball or the ring 2 or 3 times like you do in croquet.
Okay, thank you so much. Now I understand.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for your question.
Yep. Thank you, Alpha. Okay. Other question, guys? Is there any question? Anyone? Okay, Mr. Paul, I think they are quite a little bit nervous because, yeah, that's...
Oh, come on. You can give it a go, everybody. You have to put your satay sticks down now.
This is the first time to have a foreigner speaker in this department. So that's me myself a little bit nervous to have you in this webinar. Okay, I have a senior lecturer here. I try to call him Mr. Effort. Mr. Effort, are you here? Mr. Effort?
Okay. Yeah, Ibu.
Yep, Mr. Effort. Would you like to give any comment for this webinar, or maybe you have a question to Mr. Paul, please?
Okay, shall I have to turn on my camera?
I expect yes, Mr. Effort.
Hold on a second. Okay, can you see my good-looking face?
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Everett.
Nice to see you, Paul, even it's only online or on the camera. But anyway, this is quite an interesting topic of discussion. can Indonesians learn English through Australian sports? I agree that most English learners should learn through several activities, including sports. But you know, during the pandemic situation nowadays, people don't want to go out. They tend to stay at home, learning all by themselves. Okay, I don't know, within 2, 3, 4 months later, they're still willing to go out to learn the language or not. But my question is, even though this is quite not related to the topic of discussion, if that's okay with you, Paul.
Please.
Okay. Do you think that learning English online is quite effective or not? Or do you have any suggestions of how to teach or to learn English online?
I have, thank you, Everett, for the question. And it is a difficult one because it's the hope of most educational institutions that learning online is effective and will encourage students to continue. But that's a hope. And I don't know whether we really have enough research at the moment of what the outcome is of learning online. Can we learn a language online effectively? We can, but is it the best way to learn? I feel probably not. It's hard to deny that language is a social activity. It is perhaps at the essence of who we are as human beings. We use language to communicate, but it's building those relationships with people within our own community and broader communities, which makes language so vital. So learning online can be effective, but it has its limitations. And I think really when we're talking about learning a language through sport, the whole part of that is to get out and interact with people. Makes it much, much harder when we're doing it online.
Yeah.
One thing in terms of the second part of your question is suggestions of what might make it effective. We can still play games, smaller games, and talk about games, but I think it needs to be in smaller groups than often we have in a situation such as this. Like, it's very difficult to judge people's responses. It's hard to know. For instance, if you have a joke, you don't know because nobody's laughing. You just have to hope that they've understood or that they think that, oh, yep, that might be funny. But you know, in language is so connected. The words are just part of it. But the words are related to facial expression, to body expression, and a lot of that is really degraded in online learning. So I would be surprised that people don't move back to face-to-face learning as soon as they can. But in terms of those ideas, you know, scaling down activities, but that they still can be physical activities, but scaling down activities and scaling down like the amount of people involved makes it, you know, more useful. When I'm doing 10 people, like I've done tutorials with, say, 10 and 15 people, I feel it's quite a lot more effective. You know, like people are engaged, that everyone can have their mic on and they can speak. But in large situations, once you get like 20, 30 people, it's no longer engaging. It's very, very difficult.
That is actually one of the problems, you know, teaching English language in our class in Indonesia. We have a lot more students than just 15 to 20. Even I have several classes consisting of 70 students, up to 80 students. Can you imagine
Yes.
that? So online, unfortunately, this is online.
Mm.
But when it's on-site, the problems still occur. The problems still occur. Why? Because this is one of the problems of Indonesian learners learning English. Probably they're good at English only during the class session, but when they're outside, they seldom practice using the language. But if they study in Australia, for example, Monash University, so they have a lot of opportunities for them to go out and practice their language. But in Indonesia, the problem is the media. The problem is the community where they can practice, where they can, improve their English if they don't, speak the language over and over again. So once again, this has been some sort of ages problems in Indonesia. So that's why many Indonesian people don't speak good English, because they don't have the, some places to practice. They're probably just afraid of making mistakes, or they're probably just afraid of, embarrass themselves of not using good language. So again, if I were sent to Australia when I was my young age, I should have been able to speak English much better than today, because I practice a lot with Australian people in the speaking country. But Indonesia has no such place in terms of a place that is designed to practice the language. For example, in the public transportation, while several students or people speaking the language, and other people might just envy or get mad, or probably they think that, are you Indonesian or English? Because we are in Indonesia, so don't speak English. We're still in Indonesia. That's part of the problem, Paul.
There may even be another problem as well. I find that Indonesian students learning English are more comfortable mixing their language, English and Indonesian, together.
Right. Not mixing, but switching, right?
Yes. Well, sometimes code switching, sometimes intentionally. They prefer, they might feel certain phrases have more prestige, etc. And then they have to separate the two languages when they come to, say, writing an essay, or they have to come and talk formally. They have to try and separate it. It's quite difficult if they're used to speaking in mixed languages. I find that that's one of the problems for Indonesian students learning English. For Australian students learning Indonesian, it's also very, very difficult. We have the added problem when an Australian student learning Indonesian meets an Indonesian student in Australia, the Indonesian student wants to speak English and generally has better English than my students who are trying to speak in Indonesian. So that it is very, very difficult for them to pursue a conversation in Indonesian with an Indonesian student, because the student will either reply in mixed language or they'll just reply in English. And that's to do with the power relationship between English and Indonesia. As much, it's a cultural relationship, a power relationship between the two languages, which is unequal.
Okay. Well, Paul, thank you so much for answering all of those questions with them, even though they're not quite related to the topic of discussion. But I have one more question, Paul. Now let's get back to the topic discussion. Do you think that, all right, this is quite a challenging question as far as I'm concerned. An English teacher, Indonesian English teacher, should also know sports in giving them English.
Sorry, what's the last part?
Do you think that Indonesian teachers or Indonesian lecturers should know sports?
I think that if sport is such a large part of a culture,
Okay.
and we're looking at sport as part of culture, then you would think that that would be a natural avenue to explore. That if sport has this huge impact on language, which it clearly does in Australia and many other English-speaking countries, then it's something worth exploring just from a cultural point of view. And then there is the practical, physical aspect of trying to trick your brain into learning new words.
Okay, you're breaking up, Paul.
Mr. Afford, can you hear?
Now, there's a problem with the connection. I didn't quite hear what Paul said in the last part.
Okay, so Mr. Afford didn't hear the last part of Mr. Paul's words.
Statement.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Paul, he didn't hear your last part of your statement anyway.
Hello,
yeah,
Paul,
I'm just
still there.
Yes, I am. I'm just
okay.
Just trying to think of what the last part I said was.
Okay,
but
fine.
But you know, the bottom, the essential element of what I was saying was that that you have this cultural aspect, which sport is clearly a major part of everyday life in English-speaking countries, but particularly in Australia. So it seems a natural topic to pursue. And also really to get out of translation, to trick the mind into learning new words for things it already knows, that physical aspect of doing things is very, very useful.
Gestures, body language.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
well, I guess
is it enough, Mr. Afford?
I don't
One
think
more?
that I don't think that I don't think that I need to take up so much of Paul's time to give this a lot of questions. I do still have a lot of questions, but I'm afraid that some students are still willing to ask a lot of questions. Thank you, Paul, once again for the
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr.
Paul,
for your question and comments. Okay, thank you. Okay, the last part I give opportunity. Anyone want to give any question? No one?
Well, can I have a chance to ask someone who may have had a positive experience using their English while playing sport? Is there someone who has been part of a team of any sport where they've used English very much?
Okay, Nadira, you wanna say something? Nadira, can you open your mic? Nadira. Okay. Okay, let me try. Lucy, are you here, Lucy? They give comment on the chat box, Mr. Paul, but it seems they are quite shy to talk to you directly. So as you saw on the chat box, some students already delivered their comments, but yeah, when I asked When I call their names, they are just silent. Anyone, guys?
Because if someone's brave enough to put their hand up, if they don't have a question, it doesn't matter, because I would just like to ask them a question.
Okay, while waiting for the response, Mr. Paul, can I have a question anyway?
Sure.
Okay, so as what the captain of my department already mentioned before, my question is that, is there any possibility to have collaborated class between this major English literature department of UNAS with you, or maybe with Miss Anna later? Because yeah, not all department has a good international networking, right, Mr. Paul? And having you here is a blessing for me personally, because yeah, sometimes we only read on the books, okay, just based on the text, but now we can discuss directly with you, let's say talking about cross-cultural understanding, how sports can be one of the tools of us to learn, to understand, to share culture each other. So yeah, is there any possibility maybe we have a collaborative class? When you have a class, maybe we can join, or we can make a guest lecture virtually. How, Mr. Powell?
See, with those particular classes, I'm not on the campus very much, and you'd need to contact directly those lecturers or find someone there. There is the Indonesian program at Monash University, and there should be a chance there for them to collaborate more often, both discussing literature or discussing film or anything else that's there. But I would have to, this is where I would have to handball it to somebody else.
Okay then, okay. Thank you very much for your response. Anna, the last question for you. So if these students want to join, want to practice this sport, how can we make it?
Sure. Basically, me as here Indonesian and as an Australian alumna and still practicing Australia sport, welcome to the students, young people in Jakarta, including you. Just let me know when you want to join the FL training, and of course, just keep in touch. And we are so happy because Pak Paul also from Australia encouraged us and also give us insight and share experience and amazing things about how Indonesians also can learn English through sport. And here I am in Indonesia right now. Please let me know if you want to experience Australian sport, one of them FL, and also I will keep in contact with Jakarta Bintangs or FL Indonesia, and then please let us know. And and that is why I'm still connecting with communities, with Australian Sport Club, because this is also my experience to practice English as well. Beside basically to empower young generation. And thank you for this opportunity, and please let me know. And well, Pak Paul, thank you, Pak Paul. I still connect with you as well to give me again, spirit, how we keep our relationship of Australia and Indonesia, because Australia is our neighbor, and then let's make great, friendship, and one of them through sport, and the implication we can learn English as well.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So I think no more question for students. So before we close this webinar, can I ask a closing statement from Mr. Paul before we end this webinar?
Not that I've prepared a closing statement, but I will do my best. Look, I have really enjoyed having this opportunity to say or to talk a little bit about Australian sports. As you've seen or heard in my presentation, I see sport as a really essential element in understanding a culture and a wonderful way of exploring another culture, particularly if you interpret sport in perhaps broader understandings than we normally do. And as language learners, I think we're more than capable of doing it. I want to thank Anna and Yayo for this opportunity as well. You've been wonderful hosts, and I hope that everybody, and I only see your names there, I hope everyone's been able to understand my presentation today. I hope that I was clear enough, and I will enjoy meeting you if I get my chance to go to Jakarta and visit your university. Thank you for all your comments, particularly, and I saw Nadira has already sent a Go Swannies comment on her feed. That's wonderful, and I'm going to look forward to the grand final on Saturday.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paul. Before ending the webinar, can we have a photo session first?
Sure.
Okay, guys, can you open your camera, all of you, please? Come on, we want to see your handsome and beautiful face.
See, now I can see everybody. Wow.
Ah.
Sebelum ada kamera, rasanya seperti saya sendiri di ruangnya.
Yeah. Okay, so okay, Anna or me, take picture.
You, Mbak.
Okay, the first slide ya, first slide dulu ya guys. Coba yang masih tiduran, coba bangun dulu ya. Okay. 1, 2, 3, give me your best smile, guys. Cheers. Okay.
Should we take one with them all saying "Go Swannies"?
Wait a minute. Okay. The next slide. Give me your best smile. Cheers. Oke, sebentar. Oke, next part. Masih banyak yang close kamera. Oke, I think it's enough. Wait a minute. Okay, it's done. So again, Mr. Paul and Anna, on behalf of my department, I want to say thank you very much for your time, for your kindness, for your information. It's really beneficial for us to upgrade our knowledge. Even for me, the lecture, I also need to upgrade my knowledge by having you on this good occasion. I really hope that we can still make a collaboration event for the next agenda, because yeah, we really need that, Mr. Paul and Anna. Again, thank you very much for your time. Sorry if I have any mistake while bringing this event. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Paul and Anna. Guys, say hi. Say
hey, Mr. Paul. Thank you, Mr.
See you later,
Paul.
Mr. Paul.
Mr. Paul.
Mr. Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.